"You hearing me, old-timer? Or is that hearing aid turned off?" asked Lieutenant Jax Miller, his voice slicing through the low hum of the dive bar like a jagged knife. He leaned over the scarred wooden table, his shadow casting a long darkness over the solitary figure sitting in the corner booth. Mark Douglas did not look up. He sat with the stillness of a statue carved from weathered granite, his gaze fixed intently on the amber liquid in the shot glass before him. He was 72 years old, wearing a red shirt that had seen better decades and a canvas jacket that smelled of rain and wood smoke. His hands, resting on either side of the glass, were mapworks of wrinkles and liver spots, but they were steady, perfectly steady. "I said, are you deaf?" Miller repeated, louder this time, performing for the audience of 4 other young Navy SEALs standing behind him, clutching bottles of expensive beer and wearing grins that suggested they owned the world. "We need this booth. It is for active duty only. VFW is down the street." Mark slowly lifted the glass to his lips. He took a sip, savoring the burn of the cheap whiskey, and then set it back down with a soft clink that sounded deafening in the sudden silence of the immediate area. He finally raised his eyes. They were gray, clouded slightly by age but possessing a depth that felt like looking down a very deep, very cold well. "I am fine right here, son," Mark said. His voice was gravel rolling down a dry hill. Low, unbothered. Miller chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. He looked back at his squad, seeking their validation. They gave it to him with snickers and nods. Miller turned back, his jaw set. He was fresh off a successful extraction mission, riding the high of adrenaline and the invincibility of youth. He saw an old man taking up the best seat in the house, a relic who did not understand the hierarchy of the room. "You do not get it," Miller said, placing a heavy hand on the table, invading Mark's personal space. "We are celebrating. We are the tip of the spear. You are just taking up space. So unless you have a trident pinned under that flannel, I suggest you grab your cane and shuffle along." The confrontation had begun, and the air in the bar grew heavy, charged with a static electricity that made the hair on the arms of the other patrons stand up. Everyone looked, but nobody moved. The Rusty Anchor was the kind of bar that catered to the overflow of the nearby naval base, a place where sawdust covered the vomit stains and the neon signs buzzed with an annoying insectile hum. It was a place for loud stories and louder lies. But tonight the group of young SEALs in the center of the room had sucked all the oxygen out of the space. They were the apex predators here, or so they thought. Mark Douglas sighed, a sound of profound weariness rather than fear. He adjusted his position on the vinyl bench, the material cracking under his weight. He picked up a napkin and slowly wiped a ring of condensation from the table. "I paid for my drink," Mark said softly. "I will leave when it is empty." Miller's face flushed. He was not used to being told no, certainly not by a geriatric civilian who looked like a stiff breeze would knock him over. Miller's ego was a fragile thing, currently inflated by recent victories, and this refusal felt like a needle pricking a balloon. "Look at him," said Davis, one of the other SEALs, stepping forward. "He probably thinks he's tough because he did a tour in the mess hall in '75. Hey, Grandpa, what was your specialty? Peeling potatoes or scrubbing latrines?" The group erupted in laughter. It was cruel, sharp laughter meant to cut. Mark did not flinch. He continued to stare at his drink, watching the light refract through the whiskey. "You guys should show some respect," said a voice from behind the bar. Sully, the bartender, was a large man with a thick beard and a history in the Marine Corps that he rarely spoke about. He was wiping a glass with aggressive motions. "He is not bothering anyone." "Stay out of this, Sully," Miller snapped without looking back. "This is Navy business. We are just trying to figure out who we are sharing our air with." Miller turned his attention back to Mark, his eyes narrowing. He saw the way Mark sat. It wasn't the slouch of a defeated man, it was the stillness of a hunter in a blind. Though Miller was too young and too arrogant to recognize the difference. He mistook the stillness for freezing in fear. "Come on, Miller," goaded, leaning closer, the smell of premium beer on his breath wafting into Mark's face. "If you are going to sit at the warriors' table, you have to pay the toll. Tell us about your service. Who were you? Did you ever even leave the ship?" Mark remained silent. "I bet I know." Miller continued, his voice dripping with condescension. "You were a clerk, or maybe supply. You spent your time counting beans while real men were out there doing the work that let you sleep at night. That is it, isn't it?" Mark reached into his pocket. The movement was so fast that for a split second, Miller flinched, his hand twitching toward his waistband before he stopped himself, realizing how foolish he looked reacting to an old man reaching for a wallet. Mark pulled out a crumpled $10 bill and placed it on the table. "For the drink," Mark said to Sully. He started to slide out of the booth. He had decided it wasn't worth it. The quiet dignity of retreat was better than a brawl with children. But Miller wasn't done. He felt the flinch he had made, and it shamed him. He needed to regain the upper hand. He stepped in front of Mark, blocking his exit. "Not so fast," Miller said, crossing his arms. "You do not just walk away when I am talking to you. You want to leave. You answer a question first." Mark stopped. He looked up at Miller, and for the first time, a flicker of annoyance crossed his face. It was brief, like a ripple on a pond, but it was there. "Get out of my way, son," Mark said. Miller laughed. "Or what? You going to hit me with your arthritis? Look, it is a simple question. In the teams we have call signs, names earned in blood and mud, names that mean something. I am Viper. That is what they call me because I strike before they know I am there." He pointed to Davis. "That is Sledge. He breaks things." Miller leaned in, his face inches from Mark's. "So if you were ever anything more than a paper pusher, you would have a name. What is it, old man? What is your call sign? Or did they just call you Private Pile?" The bar went dead silent. The question hung in the air, a challenge that demanded an answer. The disrespect was palpable, a physical weight pressing down on the room. Mark Douglas looked at Miller, really looked at him, and for a second the dive bar dissolved. The smells of stale beer and floor wax vanished, replaced instantly by the thick, rotting stench of a jungle floor. The air was no longer conditioned and cool. It was a suffocating blanket of humidity and heat. The neon lights were gone, replaced by the silver sliver of a moon cutting through triple canopy rainforest. Mark was young again in this flash, mud smeared across his face, his breathing shallow and controlled. He was holding a knife, not a drink. He was alone. He had been alone for 3 days behind enemy lines, tracking a target that entire battalions had failed to find. He moved through the foliage without disturbing a single leaf. He was a ghost. He was a myth. He remembered the voice of his commanding officer over the radio, crackling with static, saying, "We have no assets in the area. You are on your own, Reaper." Reaper, the word echoed in his mind, bringing with it the memories of things done in the dark, of burdens carried so that others could live in the light. The weight of that name was heavier than any armor. It was a name spoken in whispers by allies and in terrified screams by enemies. The flash ended as quickly as it had begun. Mark blinked, the jungle fading back into the grimy reality of the rusty anchor. He looked at the young, arrogant face of Lieutenant Miller. He felt a profound sense of pity. "You do not want to know," Mark said softly. Miller threw his head back and laughed. "Oh, I think I do. I think the whole bar does. Come on, let's hear it. What did they call the man who filed the requisitions? Speedy? The stapler? Sully?" The bartender had seen enough. He had been watching Mark closely, not with the eyes of a civilian, but with the eyes of a man who had seen combat. When Mark had reached for his wallet, his sleeve had ridden up just an inch. It was a small thing, unnoticed by the loud seals, but Sully saw it. It wasn't a tattoo. It was a scar, a burn mark, perfectly circular, branded into the inside of the wrist. Sully froze. He had heard stories about that mark. Rumors passed down in hushed tones in NCO clubs and barracks for 40 years. It was the mark of a unit that didn't officially exist, a unit that operated so far off the books that the CIA denied knowing them. They were the ghosts of the Vietnam era and the Cold War. Sully dropped the rag he was holding. His heart hammered against his ribs. He looked at the old man, the stillness, the dead eyes, the absolute lack of fear, and the pieces clicked into place. This wasn't just a veteran. This was a legend. Sully backed away from the bar, moving toward the office door. He needed to make a call. There was a number taped to the inside of the safe, a number given to him by the owner of the bar, a retired admiral, with strict instructions. If you ever see a man with a circular brand on his right wrist, you call this number. You do not ask questions. You do not engage. You call. Sully burst into the office, his hands shaking as he dialed. He listened to the ring, feeling the seconds tick by like hours. "Hello," a voice answered. It was sharp, authoritative. "This is Sully at the Rusty Anchor," he stammered. I think he is here." "Who is here?" "The Reaper," Sully whispered. "The man with the circle brand. He is here, and there is a group of young frogs giving him a hard time. It is about to get ugly." There was a silence on the other end of the line so profound that Sully thought the call had dropped. Then the voice returned, colder than ice. "Do not let them touch him. Do not let them disrespect him. I am 3 minutes away. Keep the peace, Sully, or God help us all." Back in the main room, the tension had stretched to its breaking point. Miller was no longer laughing. The old man's refusal to play the game was infuriating him. It felt like a direct challenge to his authority. "I am making this an order," Miller barked, his voice cracking slightly. "I am a commissioned officer in the United States Navy. You will identify yourself, and you will vacate this table." Mark stood up. He moved slowly, his joints popping audibly. He stood at his full height, which was only 5'9", significantly shorter than Miller. But somehow, in that moment, he seemed to loom over the lieutenant. "I was serving this country before your father was a glint in the milkman's eye," Mark said, his voice steady. "I have earned my seat. Now move." Miller's face went purple. "You listen to me, you washed up old." He reached out and shoved Mark. It wasn't a violent shove, just a push to the shoulder to emphasize his point, to physically move the obstacle. The moment Miller's hand made contact with Mark's jacket, the air in the room seemed to shatter. Mark did not stumble, he didn't even sway. He simply looked at the hand on his shoulder, then up at Miller's face. "That was a mistake," Mark whispered. Sully came running out from behind the bar, vaulting over the counter. "Lieutenant, stand down. That is a direct order from the owner. Stand down." Miller spun around. "Shut up, Sully. This civilian put his hands on me first. He is not a civilian, you idiot," Sully roared, placing himself between the two men. Miller shoved Sully aside, his blood boiling. He turned back to Mark, his fist clenched. "I am going to teach you a lesson in respect, old man." Miller raised his hand, ready to grab Mark by the collar and drag him out the front door. He wanted to humiliate him, to show the room who the alpha was. He was past the point of reason. Then the front door of the bar exploded open. It wasn't a kick, it was a tidal wave of force. The heavy oak door slammed against the wall with a crack that sounded like a gunshot. Every head in the bar snapped toward the entrance. Standing in the doorway was not a fleet of MPs, it was a single man. He was wearing a dress blue uniform, immaculate, with rows of ribbons that stacked almost to his shoulder. The stars on his collar caught the neon light. It was Admiral Vance, the base commander. Behind him stood two men in dark suits, their earpieces visible, their posture radiating lethal intent. Admiral Vance stepped into the room. The silence that fell was absolute. It was a vacuum. The music had been cut. The clinking of glasses stopped. Even the breathing seemed to cease. Miller froze, his hand still half raised toward Mark. His eyes widened as he recognized the Admiral. He snapped to attention so fast his spine audibly cracked. "Admiral on deck," Miller shouted, his voice trembling. The other SEALs scrambled to attention, spilling beer in their haste. They stood rigid, eyes locked forward, terror replacing the arrogance on their faces. Admiral Vance did not acknowledge them. He did not even look at them. His eyes were locked on the old man in the corner booth. Vance walked across the room, his dress shoes clicking rhythmically on the hardwood floor. The sound was the only thing in the universe. He marched straight past Miller, brushing the lieutenant's shoulder as if he were a piece of furniture. Vance stopped 3 feet in front of Mark Douglas. The Admiral's face was a mask of stone, but his eyes were shimmering. He looked at Mark's weathered face, the gray stubble, the weary eyes. Then slowly, with a precision and snap that would have made a drill instructor weep, Admiral Vance raised his hand in a salute. It wasn't a perfunctory salute. It was a salute of deep, abiding reverence. He held it. 1 second, 2 seconds, 3 seconds. Mark Douglas looked at the Admiral. A small, crooked smile touched his lips. He slowly raised his hand and returned the salute, casually, but with the grace of muscle memory that never fades. "At ease, David," Mark said softly. Admiral Vance dropped his hand. He let out a breath he seemed to have been holding for years. "It has been a long time, Master Chief," Vance said, his voice thick with emotion. "We thought you were dead. We lost track of you after Panama." "I like being dead," Mark replied, sitting back down on the bench. "It is quieter." The room remained frozen. Miller and his squad were paralyzed. Their minds were racing, trying to compute what was happening. "Master Chief, Panama?" The Admiral was saluting an enlisted man. Admiral Vance turned slowly. The warmth vanished from his face, replaced by a cold fury that made the earlier tension seem like a playground squabble. He looked at Lieutenant Miller. Miller was sweating profusely, the droplets running down his temple. "Lieutenant," Vance said, his voice low and dangerous. "Sir," Miller squeaked. "Do you know who this man is?" "No, sir." He wouldn't give his name, sir. He was refusing to vacate the booth for active duty personnel. Vance stepped closer to Miller. He invaded his space just as Miller had invaded Mark's. "This man," Vance said, projecting his voice so every soul in the bar could hear, "is Mark Douglas. But you wouldn't find him in your databases. His file is black. It has been black since 1968. Vance pointed a finger at Mark. "When I was a brand new ensign in the Mekong Delta, my patrol boat was ambushed. We were taking heavy fire from 3 sides. We were sinking. We called for air support, but the weather was too bad. We called for extraction, but they said it was too hot. We were dead men. Vance paused, his eyes boring into Miller. Then out of the tree line, one man came. One man. He didn't have a squad. He didn't have air support. He had a knife and a rifle. He moved through that ambush like a scythe through wheat. He silenced 3 machine gun nests in under 4 minutes. He dragged me and 6 of my men 3 miles through a swamp with a bullet in his leg. Vance looked back at Mark with reverence. We asked him his name. He didn't say a word. We asked for his call sign. He just looked at us and disappeared back into the jungle. We later found out the enemy had a name for him. They called him the Reaper. Because when he showed up, life ended for them. Miller's face was the color of ash. He looked at the old man in the red shirt, the man he had mocked, the man he had tried to physically remove. He felt a nausea rising in his gut. Vance turned back to Miller. You asked for his call sign, Lieutenant. You wanted to know if he was a cook. This man has more confirmed kills with a blade than you have days in the service. He is the reason the SEAL teams have the reputation they do. He wrote the doctrine you are trying to learn. And you tried to throw him out of a bar. Miller couldn't speak. His mouth opened and closed like a fish. Vance roared, the sound shaking the walls. You are an officer. You are supposed to be a leader. And here you are, bullying an old man because you think your trident makes you a god. This man earned his trident before it even existed. He is the grandfather of your warfare, and you treated him like garbage. Vance ripped the patch off Miller's uniform, the unit patch on his shoulder. The sound of the Velcro tearing was violent. You are a disgrace to the uniform, Lieutenant. You and your men are confined to quarters effective immediately. You will face a board of inquiry tomorrow morning. I will personally strip you of your command. Now get out of my sight before I forget I am an officer and handle this the way the Master Chief would. Get out! Miller and his squad scrambled. They stumbled over each other in their haste to reach the door. They didn't look back. They fled into the night, their careers in ashes, their arrogance shattered. The door swung shut behind them, leaving a ringing silence in the bar. Admiral Vance turned back to Mark. He composed himself, smoothing his uniform. I apologize, Mark. I should have taught them better. The standards are slipping. Mark chuckled softly. He pushed the empty shot glass toward the center of the table. They are young, David. They are full of fire and vinegar. They just haven't been burned yet. Do not be too hard on them. They just need to learn that the ocean is deep, and there are always bigger fish. Vance nodded. Can I buy you a drink, Reaper? For old time's sake? Mark shook his head as he stood up, his knees cracking again. No, I think I have had enough noise for one night. I just wanted a quiet drink. He buttoned his canvas jacket. He looked small again, just an old man ready for bed, but nobody in that room would ever see him as just an old man again. As Mark walked toward the door, the patrons of the bar, bikers, locals, off-duty sailors parted for him. They stood up, one by one without a word being spoken. They stood. It wasn't a military formation. It was a jagged, messy line of respect. As Mark passed, heads bowed. Someone clapped slowly, and then stopped, realizing silence was the higher honor. Mark paused at the door. He looked back at Admiral Vance. David, he said. Yes, Mark. Tell the bartender the kid paid for my drink. He left a 10 on the table, but the kid's ego should cover the rest. Mark pushed the door open and stepped out into the cool night air. Vance watched him go, a look of profound sadness and pride on his face. He walked over to the table where Mark had been sitting. He picked up the empty shot glass. He held it up to the light. For a moment the bar remained silent. Then Sully, the bartender, cleared his throat. Admiral, what can I get you? Vance set the glass down gently. Nothing, Sully. Just leave this glass here. Nobody sits at this table tonight. Vance turned to the room. You all saw nothing tonight. Is that clear? Clear, Admiral, a chorus of voices replied. The Admiral nodded and walked out, his security detail trailing him. The door closed. The hum of the neon sign returned. The music stayed off. Sully walked over to the table. He looked at the ring of water Mark had wiped away, now drying on the wood. He looked at the empty glass. The jungle rain is torrential, hammering against the banana leaves like machine gun fire. It is 1969. Mark is 22. He is lying in the mud, covered in leeches. He has been motionless for 12 hours. Below him, in the valley, a prisoner camp. He sees the American POWs. He sees the guards. He checks his watch. He checks his knife. He touches the circular burn on his wrist, a self-inflicted reminder of the circle of life and death. He stands up, the mud sliding off him like oil. He does not run. He flows. He moves toward the camp, A shadow detached from the night. The first guard dies without a sound. The second sees him but sees only a blur, a wraith, a reaper coming to collect. Mark whispers one word into the darkness as he begins his work. Home. Back in the bar, the mood had shifted permanently. The air felt hallowed. In the days that followed, the story of what happened at the Rusty Anchor spread like wildfire through the base, though no names were ever officially used. Lieutenant Miller was quietly transferred to a desk job in Alaska. The other members of his squad were put through a grueling retraining program focused on history and humility. A week later, a small package arrived at the bar for Sully. Inside was a bottle of very expensive, very old whiskey, and a note written in shaky cursive. Keep the table open. Minor Mac. Never came back to the Rusty Anchor. He didn't need to. He had his quiet. He had his dignity. And he had reminded a new generation that the most dangerous things in the world often look the most unassuming. Somewhere in a small house on the edge of town, an old man sat on his porch, sipping coffee, watching the sunrise. His hands were steady. His eyes were clear. He was just Mark to his neighbors. But to those who knew, to those who had felt the temperature drop when he spoke, he would always be the Reaper. And the silence he left behind was the loudest sound the world had ever heard. If you enjoyed this story of hidden valor and the lessons learned the hard way, please take a moment to like this video and share it with a friend. Subscribe to Veteran Valor for more stories about the heroes walking among us. You never know who you might be sitting next to.